Sometimes we don't realize the opportunities that present themselves are sometimes presented themselves in such a way for our benefit, even if the circumstances that got us there may not have been ideal. And the toughest struggle is sometimes recognizing that even though you may not have wanted to be in a particular situation, that situation creates the opportunities for you to do other things that may benefit you in the longer run, even if that wasn't the path you expected. So let me lay out how this actually happened for me. When I started my very first job, it was in the spring of 1992. I got a job working for the state of Florida, Division of Safety under the Florida Department of Labor and Employment Security. The Division of Safety was a small organization, probably about a little under 100 employees. It had 5 offices located throughout the state of Florida, and it also had a headquarters office. And I had the opportunity to get hired at the headquarters office. Now, for me, this was not necessarily the dream job, but it turned into a dream situation. And what do I mean by that? Well, I got hired there by my boss, who was actually a bio major, just like I. I actually had the opportunity to work with all of the upper hierarchy for the agency who were in the headquarters office. The director of the agency itself was literally 2 offices down from me, and I saw him every day. And I was on the pulse of knowing what was going on in every field office because everything that happened in their office related back to ours. And since I was there and I was new, I was in a really great situation because my boss was at the forefront of some new programming that they were doing, and he encouraged me and included me in a lot of the development of the various programs to train everybody throughout. It was great. It fed into my kind of the event planning aspect of my life, the organizational aspect of my life. This is going to sound crazy because it's 30 plus years ago. We're talking about the early years of Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Outlook, Microsoft Team, Word, all those various tools, and so forth. And so I was at the forefront of all of those. The other part that was awesome was that we would regularly travel to these offices on a regular basis just to assist with the implementation of different things. And that meant we would go to Jacksonville, Florida. We would go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Miami, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Tampa, Florida. So I was traveling regularly throughout the state of Florida. It was awesome. And as such, during that first year when I got there in April of 1992, I was in a great position because I finally found, or at least in my mind, a place where I felt like I fit. Like everything made sense to me in this environment. And so as a result, I kept thinking to myself, I could not see myself being any other place other than this place here. Now, mind you, I was about 23 at the time, so of course I clearly have other things in mind for the future, but this is where I wanted to get my jump off. And so as such, I started trying to figure out how I could use where I'm at in terms of how can I use this as a jump off point to do other things within the scope of the agency while taking full advantage of being at a workplace I fully love being. Now, one of the things that most people didn't realize at the time was that I had always had an interest in pursuing advanced degrees. So after getting my biology degree, my first thought was, since I wasn't going to law school, was maybe I need to start working on getting a master's degree. So at that point, I started exploring graduate programs. And since I was in Tallahassee, there were 2 premier universities right there. Florida A&M University, Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and Florida State University. So in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I take advantage of going to graduate schools at these 2 great institutions? So I started doing research, and I not only started researching there, I started researching other schools that are in the area, just in case. And so in the course of researching, I talked to my supervisor, who noticed that I was researching this and so forth, and he asked me a very interesting question. He said, do you want to be in a lab the rest of your life? And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And I stopped because I was looking at degrees as Masters of Sciences in cellular biology and molecular biology. And those classes, those courses and those masters were heavy lab related. And so he, of course, had a chance to observe me as we were going to all these different locations. And he just kept saying, you just seem like the kind of person that thrives to be out amongst people and interacting and in the field. Do you really want to restrict yourself to being into a closed environment on an ongoing basis? And at that particular point, I made the decision that I was like, well, no, not necessarily. So he recommended that I pursue a different degree, one that would not only take advantage of my science background, which is something I was very passionate about, but also be a degree which would give me the ability to move into the field. And so that was a degree called industrial hygiene. It was the evaluation of occupational and occupational exposures, injuries and illnesses in the workplace. So in this arena, I would be working with dust, fumes, gases, heat, ergonomics, indoor air quality, all these different things that were fascinating to me. I was going to be going to school for. And so he was like, he had a similar degree. It was a master's of public health and industrial hygiene. So he encouraged me to at least research it and see if that would be consistent with what I would be interested in doing in terms of science as well as in the field. Well, I did the research and he was right. It was awesome. I loved everything about it. It kind of fed to, I was, in this new industry working for the state of Florida as a safety and health specialist. It took that in line, but it had such a science component that made sense to me. But now I was at a unique crossroads though, because Florida State and Florida A&M did not have a master's program in industrial hygiene. As a matter of fact, no place in Florida had one except for one school. The University of South Florida College of Public Health had a master's of public health in industrial hygiene. It was the only one in the state. And so I was like, this is the craziest thing in the world. But my boss turns to me and he says, because this is related to your job will pay for it. And I'm like, oh, it just gets better. But this is still a problem. I'm in Tallahassee. University of South Florida is in Tampa, 4 hours away. How was I going to pull this off? Well, after doing more research, I made the determination that there was a program that would have given me the ability to do it. And it was called educational leave. And this was a way for me to be able to effectively go on leave. The agency would continue paying me my salary. I would keep my job. But what I would be able to do is I would be able to go to Tampa for a year, pay for my graduate school for that year. And then once they were done, I could come back and resume my duties. This was just awesome. So in my mind, this was great. I was going to be able to have my cake and eat it too. I could keep my job, which I loved. I could go for a master's degree that I was interested in. It had the educational ability to do it where I could go as a full-time student and not have to worry about being an employee and working at the same time. And on top of that, the government was going to pay for it. I mean, this was just a win-win until I realized it wasn't. So at one particular point, I had a conversation with the assistant HR director, and I asked her about this educational leave program. She was familiar with it, but then she told me something interesting. She said the program was no longer available. Of course, like I said, I'm 23 years old or 24. I'm perplexed because in my mind, I'm thinking, why would you have a program that's in your policy manual, but it's not available? That makes no sense to me. But it didn't matter. She was very clear. It wasn't available. So now I'm stuck because in this particular instance, there is this great program that I'm really fascinated about. I'm also fascinated by the fact that it gives me the ability to get my master's degree, which is what I want. So what do I do? Because it's very clear, anything else I try, Masters of Science in Cellular Biology or Microbiology or anything of that nature, or molecular biology, I was going to have to pay for that myself. But this program was something that was going to feed into my science background, relate to my job, and the government was going to pay. So since educational leave was not available, I had two options. One, don't go and just call it a loss. Or two, transfer from the headquarters office to the field office in Tampa. And boy, I felt some kind of way about that. The one thing I enjoyed about working in the headquarters office is that there were all these different nuanced and new and improved and great things that I was doing. But if I went to the field office, I was going to be relegated to just doing field-related things for that particular office. And in my mind, I had told myself that was constraining on me. But the reality is that if I went to the field office, I could go to graduate school. But if I went down there to the field office, there was no guarantee that the job that I had in Tallahassee would be there for me when I got back. So now I'm in this conundrum of having to decide, what am I going to do? And so I will tell you begrudgingly. And why do you say begrudgingly? Because I didn't want to go back. Because in my mind, I had graduated from school at the University of Tampa. I had been back there for about a year after I graduated and did some military training. So I didn't want to come back. I was telling myself that I was evolving when I came to Tallahassee, and now I feel like I'm going right back, even though I'm going to further my educational pursuits. So I had to make this decision. And so, as fate would have it, I made the decision that, unfortunately, even though I did not want to do this, I transferred. And so I literally, got my stuff, went and found an apartment, loaded all my stuff, and I traveled from there, from Tallahassee, Florida to Tampa to pursue the degree. And that I thought was going to be my next chapter. But then there was a wrinkle. So one of the things that we used to do on a regular basis when I was with this agency was that on an annual basis, we would have, it would be a convention, but it was really just kind of like a get together where we would get together. The director would talk about the direction of the organization, things of this nature. We would break out into program areas, things of that nature. So when I first got down there, I can still remember the director, who I mentioned before, was only a couple of doors down from me, came up to me and he was like, "Hey, you know, I heard you transferred, out of the headquarters office." He knew I'd gone, so he was teasing me about it. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to graduate school." He said, "So you're in grad school down in Tampa?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What? Did you not like the headquarters office?" And I'm like, "I loved it. I adored it. I really wish I didn't have to leave, but here we are." So he turns to me and he says, "We have educational leave, right? You could have taken educational leave for a year, come down here, got your degree, and came right back." And as he was saying that, the assistant HR director came up and stood next to the HR director. This is the same woman who told me that this wasn't available. And he said, and I turned to him and I said, "I was told that the educational leave program wasn't available." And he said, "The educational leave is available. Who told you that it wasn't available?" And I remember giving a casual look to the lady who was next to him, because she had this look of horror in her face, because she had literally given me misinformation. I don't think she was purposely trying to mislead me, but she literally told me one thing and he basically said whatever I was told was woefully incorrect. And at that moment, I was pissed. But I'm sitting here now in this position is, do I blow up her world or do I not say anything? And so I did a quick cost benefit analysis. In my mind, I'm thinking blowing up her world changes nothing, because when I left by this point in time, I had been out of the office by a couple of months. They had already replaced me. So there would be nothing for me to go back to. And so there was no way to undo what has happened. I'd already signed a lease for about a year. I was already in classes. I was already there. I just didn't even worry about it. So what I did was I told him, I said, "Well, it doesn't really matter because I'm here now." But here was the wild part about that. Once I heard that, my attitude changed. Now, remember, I'm young, so I keep throwing that out there as if it's an excuse. But the reality is, I got into my feelings quickly about how I was dealt with, because instinctively at this particular point in time, I didn't look at it now that, okay, I'm going to take advantage of my situation here. I was bitter because I felt like this was my job and you prevented me from holding on to the job that I loved, that I thought was doing right by me, by telling me something that was not true. Now, back then, I thought she purposely did this. As I got older, I realized in the grander scheme of things, it's very possible that she made a mistake. And I had a responsibility as well. I could have followed up. But in my mind, I told myself, that's not my responsibility if this is what she does for a living. So the person who knows the most about it is her. But it was wild because initially I leaned so heavily into being angry, it affected my performance for a while. And because what happened was I went through the remainder of the time there, happy that I could go to graduate school, but bitter at the circumstances that caused me to be in Tampa to go to graduate school. But while I was walking around there with my attitude and everything, what I didn't realize is that something shocking was happening. I was learning things. Yeah. And you're sitting there, well, what do you mean by learning things? Well, the reality is that when I worked in the corporate office, I worked at it from a policy standpoint. So I didn't actually have field hand-on experience. And so what ended up happening is once I transferred to the field, I was put in a specific unit. And I then at that particular point got a lot of hands-on field experience. That meant I was going out to a lot of smaller employers and larger employers, different work environments. I got exposed to different types of trade practices, union activities. All the things, these were things that I didn't get exposure to working in the corporate office, the headquarters office. I got these when I was working out in the field. And what I did not know was that these experiences would benefit me once I became commissioned as a naval officer and went into the military as an industrial hygiene officer after graduate school, because almost every environment that I was exposed to in the arena when I was working for the state, there was a military component that was like it when I got to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So all of these field experiences that I didn't want to deal with, but ended up having to deal with once I was pursuing my master's degree, would end up benefiting me once I got into the military. Who knew? Because the problem was is that I was so busy spending most of my energy being annoyed that I felt like somebody tricked me or misled me or deceived me and prevented me from holding on to my dream job so I could get my master's on my term, that it never crossed my mind that I was in this great position to add to my skills, not only the skills that I had acquired from working a year in the corporate office, headquarters office, but also the skills that I would acquire working in the field, because I got a chance to not only work with developing safety and health programs for various industries, I actually got a chance to work with implementing them. And I traveled I traveled more extensively when I was in Tampa than I was when I was in Tallahassee. I literally I traveled to Miami more than I did there. I traveled to parts like not Mobile, excuse me, Pensacola, Florida, and so forth. I actually traveled more when I was in the field office than I did when I was in the headquarters office. And I got a lot of experience that I just did not even think would benefit me, but did. But when I left there and I had a chance to mature a little bit and so forth, I realized a few things. Your job is not your identity. The job is what you do for a living. And the reality is that at that particular point in time, my main focus should have been and ended up being on evolving professionally. It's funny because whether I was mature enough to accept it or not, me going to Tampa and going to the field helped me mature professionally. Me going to graduate school helped me mature professionally. Me doing this in this environment, from spending a year in a headquarters office under a controlled policy environment to going to a field to seeing real world application benefited me. But because a lot of times what happens is that when we're in a system that's imperfect and something happens, it's easy to extrapolate that and think that that's a personal affront against you. I took that as such. But fortunately for me in the long run, despite my youth, despite the attitude that I may have had, despite the fact that I may have resented it, making the move that I did in the long run ended up being the most beneficial and most prudent course of action that I could have taken. So it's important to remember that sometimes it's important that we don't allow ourselves to get so emotionally invested in our job that we think that our job defines us, and anything that negatively impacts us in a particular way is a personal affront against us. In my case, I was lucky because in the end, everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to continue my natural evolution and growth towards the direction that I was heading. And always remember, sometimes you get to those points in your lives where sometimes incomplete information or systems imperfections may result in opportunities to help you grow, even if that's not what they were intended for. Always remember, at the end of the day, your focus as an individual should be on your evolution of your personal and professional growth. It's not about whether you can stay locked into a job that you feel works best for you in terms of your identity. At the end of the day, your job, whether you're there or not, is going to move on with or without you. So you need to move on in a manner that works for your benefit so that you can grow accordingly, even if that means leaving the job or doing something that you didn't expect to do, but now you find yourself doing. I don't know if you know it, but there's always a background and a reason behind I do most of my stories or most of the content that I do. And if you want to know more about it, I got membership groups. Did you know that? And it has members only shorts or members only video, inside commentary, special behind the look scenes, all of these extra toys so that you can get an appreciation of what was the motivating factor behind the content I produce. If you ever watch my content and you want it more, this is for you.